My own father stood at the doors of the grand ballroom, looked me up and down with absolute disgust, and hissed, "You're an embarrassment to the Carter name. Leave." I was banned from the most important family ceremony of the decade. But they had no idea who they had just turned away. In the Carter family, love was not something given unconditionally. It was a currency, strictly rationed and awarded only to those who possessed the right rank, the right medals, and the right public image. We were a military dynasty. My grandfather had stormed the beaches of Normandy. My father, Owen Carter, was a highly decorated Army colonel who retired into a lucrative defense contracting career. To be a Carter meant to bleed camouflage and sweat excellence. There were 2 daughters in our household, my older sister Jessica and me, Sophia. Jessica was the golden child. Though she never enlisted, she became a high-powered corporate lawyer specializing in military law, a path my father deemed an acceptable battlefield. She was beautiful, ruthless, and, most importantly to my parents, engaged to Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Knox, a rising star at the Pentagon who was widely expected to wear a star on his shoulder within the decade. Then, there was me. 10 years ago, I commissioned into the Army with the highest honors from my academy. My father threw a massive party, boasting to his friends that I was going to be the first female combat commander in the family's history. But 2 years later, my official public record showed a catastrophic failure. According to the unclassified files, I had washed out of a specialized training program due to a lack of physical and mental fortitude. Following that disgrace, my record stated I was quietly reassigned to a dead-end logistics desk in the Quartermaster Corps, allegedly spending my days counting staplers, auditing sleeping bags, and managing supply depots in frozen, forgotten corners of Alaska. That was the cover story anyway. The reality was vastly different. I hadn't washed out. I had been recruited. For the past 8 years, my life had existed entirely off the books, buried deep within a highly classified Tier 1 operations unit under the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. I didn't count sleeping bags. I led covert strike teams into hostile territories, where the United States officially had no presence. I hunted high-value targets, disrupted terror networks, and spent months at a time living in the shadows. But because of the nature of my work, I couldn't tell a single soul. To my family, I was a spectacular failure, a lazy, unmotivated desk jockey who had squandered the mighty Carter legacy. The tension reached a boiling point the week of the Joint Legacy Gala at Fort Marshall. It was meant to be the pinnacle of my family's social calendar. Not only was my father receiving a prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award from the Department of Defense for his private sector work, but the gala also served as the official high society celebration of Jessica and Bradley's engagement. I had just returned stateside from a brutal, deeply classified deployment in Syria. We had successfully extracted 3 hostages from an underground bunker, but the operation had gone loud. I had taken shrapnel to my left thigh and suffered a concussive blast that still left my ears ringing in quiet rooms. The Pentagon had granted me a mandatory 4-week medical leave. Against my better judgment, I decided to go home. When I arrived at my parents' sprawling estate, dragging my duffel bag and walking with a noticeable limp, there were no warm embraces. My mother, Beatrice, opened the door, her eyes immediately darting to my cane. "Sophia, you're early," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "What on earth happened to your leg? Did you fall off a loading dock?" "Something like that," I replied, forcing a polite smile. My father walked into the foyer, holding a crystal glass of scotch. He didn't hug me. He didn't even say hello. He just stared at my plain civilian clothes. "I hope you brought something appropriate for the gala tomorrow." "And by appropriate, I mean civilian attire. You will not wear your dress uniform." I paused, gripping the handle of my bag. "I'm still an active duty officer, Dad." "You are an inventory clerk," he snapped, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Bradley will be there in his mess dress, wearing the Bronze Star he earned in actual combat. Dozens of real officers will be there. I will not have you parading around in a uniform you've disgraced, acting as if you are their equal. Do you understand me?" I bit the inside of my cheek, suppressing the instinct to defend myself. In my bag, Neatly folded in a sealed garment bag, was my new dress uniform. The one bearing the silver star of a brigadier general, a promotion signed off by the president just 3 days prior, making me one of the youngest general officers in modern history. But I couldn't tell him that. The operational security of my unit depended on my unassuming cover. "Understood," I whispered. The following evening, the Fort Marshal Officers Club was transformed into a glittering sea of brass, polished metals, and expensive evening gowns. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the sprawling ballroom. Waiters in crisp white shirts wove through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne. I wore a simple, understated navy blue dress that covered the bandages on my leg and the burn scars on my arms. I stayed near the perimeter of the room, sipping sparkling water and observing the crowd with the hypervigilance ingrained in me by years of surviving ambushes. Across the room, my family held court. Jessica looked radiant in a designer gown, hanging onto Bradley's arm as he recounted war stories to a group of captivated junior officers. My father stood beside them, beaming with a pride he had never once directed at me. "Ah, there she is." A loud, arrogant voice boomed. I turned to see Bradley approaching, a smug grin plastered across his face, a glass of bourbon in his hand. Jessica and my parents trailed close behind him, along with a few of his sycophantic friends. "Sophia," Bradley said, his voice carrying over the music, "we were just talking about your vital contributions to the war effort. Tell me, how fierce is the battle of the missing paperclips these days? Have you secured the perimeter around the toner cartridges?" His friends chuckled. My mother looked away, embarrassed, while my father glared at me, silently warning me not to make a scene. I looked at Bradley. I noted the slight tremor in his left hand when he held his drink, the way his eyes darted around seeking validation signs of a man who relied on rank rather than respect to lead. "The supply chains are secure, Bradley," I said evenly, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. "It's a quiet job, but I suppose true leadership is about handling whatever mission you're given without needing an audience to applaud you." The laughter from his friends abruptly died. Bradley's smug smile vanished, replaced by a deep, ugly flush of red creeping up his neck. He stepped closer, his chest puffed out. "Excuse me? Are you lecturing me on leadership, Captain? You're a glorified delivery driver. If you had half the backbone of a real soldier, you wouldn't be hiding behind a desk." "Bradley, please," Jessica intervened, placing a manicured hand on his chest. "Don't waste your breath. She's just jealous." My father moved with blinding speed. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep, and physically dragged me away from the group. My injured leg screamed in pain, but I refused to wince. He pulled me out of the ballroom and into the quiet, dimly lit hallway near the coat check. "What the hell is wrong with you?" my father hissed, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and fury. "Bradley is a lieutenant colonel. He is a combat veteran. How dare you speak to him with such disrespect?" "He insulted me first, Dad," I replied, my voice steady. I merely responded. "You have no right to respond," he barked, pointing a finger at my chest. "You are a stain on this family's record." Every time my friends ask about my daughter in the military, I have to lie and change the subject, because the truth is too humiliating. "You failed. You washed out because you are weak." I stared into the eyes of the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, who had cheered when I received my academy acceptance letter. Now, all I saw was a stranger obsessed with optics. "I serve my country, Dad, just like you did." "You push paper," he spat out. He took a step back, adjusting his tuxedo jacket as if touching me had dirtied him. "This night is about honoring the Carter legacy. It is about celebrating Jessica and Bradley. I will not let your bitterness ruin it. You are banned from that room. I don't want to see your face anywhere near the ceremony. Go wait in the car, or go sit in the lobby. But if you step foot in that ballroom, you will never be welcome in my house again." He turned on his heel and marched back into the glittering light of the party, leaving me alone in the shadows. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury I had abandoned somewhere in a dusty trench 5 years ago. I simply smoothed out my dress, ignored the throbbing in my thigh, and walked slowly toward the front lobby of the club. The lobby was mostly empty, save for a bartender polishing glasses and a few security personnel stationed near the heavy oak doors. I sat down in a leather armchair near the entrance, resting my cane against the table, and pulled out my encrypted phone. I had a dozen unread secure messages from the Pentagon, mostly logistical updates regarding my new command and the transfer of my unit to a new operational theater. About 30 minutes passed. Through the glass double doors, I could see the flashing lights of a police escort approaching the club. 2 black armored SUVs pulled up to the curb. The heavy doors swung open, and the cold night air rushed in, accompanied by a flurry of sudden, chaotic activity. The base commander, Major General Davis, hustled in first, looking visibly stressed. Behind him walked a man whose presence commanded the immediate attention of every soul in the room, General Thomas Henderson, a 4-star general, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and one of the most powerful men in the United States military. Word of the VIP arrival must have reached the ballroom instantly. Within seconds, the doors to the main hall burst open. My father, Bradley, and a swarm of high-ranking sycophants scrambled into the lobby, desperate to greet the chairman. "General Henderson," my father called out smoothly, pushing past the base commander with practiced arrogance. He extended his hand, flashing a brilliant, camera-ready smile. "Owen Carter, sir. We are so incredibly honored you could make an appearance at our family's legacy gala. Let me introduce you to my future son-in-law, Lieutenant Colonel Knox." General Henderson didn't even break his stride. He walked right past my father's outstretched hand, completely ignoring the stunned silence that washed over the crowd of elite officers. Henderson's sharp eyes scanned the lobby until they locked onto the dark corner where I was sitting. The 4-star general bypassed the billionaires, the politicians, and the arrogant lieutenant colonel. He walked straight up to my leather chair and stopped. I stood up, ignoring the burning pain in my leg, and squared my shoulders. General Henderson snapped his heels together, in front of my father, in front of Bradley, in front of the entire stunned Carter family. The highest-ranking officer in the United States military raised his hand and offered a crisp, perfectly executed salute. The silence in the lobby was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating quiet, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the distant, muffled jazz playing behind the ballroom doors. I stood straight, ignoring the fiery spikes of pain radiating from my shrapnel-scarred thigh. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my right hand and returned the salute to the highest-ranking military officer in the free world. "General Henderson, sir," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. General Henderson dropped his hand, a warm, genuine smile breaking through his normally stony exterior. He reached out and gripped my shoulder with paternal firmness. "Welcome back to the light, General Carter. It's damn good to see you in one piece. The President sends his personal regards, along with his gratitude for your work in Damascus." Behind me, I heard a sharp intake of breath. My father stepped forward, his polished smile faltering, replaced by a mask of utter bewilderment. He looked from me to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, letting out a nervous, patronizing chuckle. "General Henderson, sir, I believe there has been a mistake. A misunderstanding. This is my daughter, Sophia. She's a captain. In logistics, she manages supply chains." General Henderson turned his gaze slowly toward my father. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the frigid, unyielding glare of a man who had commanded armies. "Mr. Carter," Henderson said, his voice dropping an octave, echoing off the marble floors, "I do not make mistakes. And I do not need a civilian contractor to read me the dossier of my own Tier 1 operatives." Bradley, whose face had gone dangerously pale, tried to salvage the situation. He stepped up beside my father, puffing out his chest to display his medals. "Sir, with all due respect, I have access to the personnel databases. Captain Carter washed out of advanced training 8 years ago. Her file is public record." General Henderson looked at Bradley as if he were a particularly irritating insect. He looked down at the silver oak leaves on Bradley's shoulders, then at his medals, lingering on the bronze star. "Lieutenant Colonel Knox, is it?" Henderson asked softly. "Yes, sir," Bradley responded, practically vibrating with the desire to impress. "I know your file, Knox. I read it yesterday," Henderson said, taking a slow step toward him. You earned that Bronze Star writing policy papers in a heavily fortified green zone in Baghdad. A commendable administrative effort. But do not presume to speak to me about records you do not have the security clearance to comprehend. Bradley swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Sir, Shut your mouth, Colonel, Henderson snapped, the command cutting through the air like a whip. He turned his attention back to my father and the rest of the gawking crowd. Since her cover is officially blown as of 0800 this morning, and since she is transitioning into a public-facing command, I suppose I can clarify the disgrace of the Carter family. My mother put a trembling hand over her mouth. Jessica stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sudden, burning envy. Sophia Carter did not wash out, Henderson announced, his voice carrying the weight of indisputable authority. She was hand-selected by the Secretary of Defense for a Black Ops detachment under the Joint Special Operations Command. For the past 8 years, while most of you were attending galas and polishing your boots, she was operating behind enemy lines. She has dismantled human trafficking rings in Eastern Europe, hunted high-value insurgents in the mountains of Afghanistan, and led hostage rescue teams in Syria. The crowd of elite officers in the lobby stood paralyzed. The whispers began, rippling through the gathered brass like a tidal wave. Henderson gestured to my leg. Last week, she took a piece of mortar shrapnel to the thigh while shielding a civilian hostage from a blast radius. She refused medical evacuation until her entire team was wheels up. That clumsy fall she suffered is earning her a third Purple Heart. My father's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, shock, denial, and a sudden, desperate realization of what he had done. Third, he whispered, his voice cracking. General, Brigadier General? That is correct, Henderson said, signed by the President, which is why I am here tonight. Base Commander Davis? Major General Davis stepped forward, holding a sleek mahogany box. Sir, I am not here to drink champagne or hand out civilian lifetime achievement awards, Henderson said, looking directly into my father's eyes. I flew out here tonight to officially pin the star on one of the most lethal, dedicated, and brilliant officers this nation has ever produced. He turned to me, General Carter. I understand you have your dress uniform with you? Yes, sir, I replied, in my vehicle. Go change. We will hold the ceremony in the main ballroom, Henderson ordered. He glanced at my father. I assume the Carter family has no objections to sharing the stage? My father, the man who had physically dragged me out of that very room moments ago, could only shake his head, completely speechless. The atmosphere in the Fort Marshall Officers Club ballroom had completely shifted by the time I returned. The lively jazz music had been silenced. The hundreds of guests, generals, senators, defense contractors, and socialites were arranged in rigid formation around the main stage. I walked through the double doors, and the room snapped to attention. I was no longer wearing the understated civilian dress. I wore the dark blue dress uniform of the United States Army. The gold stripes on my sleeves caught the light of the chandeliers. But it was the left side of my chest that drew every eye in the room. Where Bradley wore a neat, modest stack of administrative ribbons, my chest was heavily armored with the true weight of war. The Silver Star, the Defense Superior Service Medal, 3 Purple Hearts, the Legion of Merit, the Combat Action Badge. I walked down the center aisle, my cane abandoned. I forced myself to walk without a limp, ignoring the searing pain, fueled by pure adrenaline and 8 years of suppressed vindication. When I reached the stage, General Henderson was waiting. Behind him stood my family. Jessica looked physically ill, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide her pallor. Bradley looked as though he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. My father's eyes were darting around the room, assessing the optics, calculating how quickly he could twist this narrative to his advantage. I stood at attention before the chairman. Raise your right hand, Henderson instructed. In front of the hundreds of people who had deemed me a failure, I took the oath of office for a flag officer. When the words were spoken, General Henderson took the Silver Star from the mahogany box and firmly pinned it to my epaulette. Base Commander Davis pinned the second one. Ladies and gentlemen, Henderson projected into the microphone. I present to you Brigadier General Sophia Carter. The applause was deafening. It wasn't the polite golf clap applause of a society event. It was thunderous, genuine respect from military personnel who understood exactly what those ribbons on my chest meant. As the applause died down, my father rushed forward. The politician in him had taken over. He threw his arms open, a wide, camera-ready smile plastered on his face. "My daughter," my father proclaimed loudly, ensuring the front row of VIPs could hear him. "I always knew you were destined for greatness, Sophia. The Carter legacy lives on. I am so incredibly proud of you. We kept her secret so well, didn't we, Beatrice?" He reached out to hug me, to claim my victory as his own. I took a precise step backward, leaving his arms grasping at empty air. "Do not touch me," I said. My voice was low, but the microphone on the podium picked it up, broadcasting my words across the silent ballroom. My father's smile froze. "Sophia, please, people are watching. Let them watch," I replied, turning to face him fully. 10 minutes ago, you dragged me into a hallway. You told me I was a stain on this family. You told me that I was a failure, that my service was a humiliation, and you banished me from this room because I wasn't wearing a rank that you deemed acceptable. A collective gasp echoed from the crowd. The high society guests exchanged shocked glances. "Sophia, you're confused." "I didn't mean," my father stammered, the color draining from his face as his carefully curated public image disintegrated before his eyes. "I am not confused, Owen," I said, using his first name for the first time in my life. "You love the military only for the status it brings you. You don't care about sacrifice. You don't care about honor. You only care about the medals you can brag about at the country club." I didn't survive 8 years in the shadows for the Carter legacy. I survived for the men and women standing to my left and my right. I turned my gaze to Bradley, who instantly stiffened, sweating profusely through his mess dress collar. "Lieutenant Colonel Knox," I said coldly. "Yes, General," Bradley barked, snapping to a rigid salute. "You asked me earlier how the battle of the missing paperclips was going," I reminded him. "I believe you called me a glorified delivery driver." "Ma'am, it was a severe lapse in judgment. I apologize," Bradley stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "Your apology is noted," I said, "but your judgment is severely flawed. General Henderson, if I may?" "The floor is yours, General," Henderson said, crossing his arms and watching the dismantling of Bradley Knox with visible satisfaction. "Earlier today, my transfer orders were finalized," I announced to the room, locking eyes with Bradley. "I am the new commanding officer of the Special Operations Command at Fort Marshall. That includes oversight of all advanced tactical training and rapid deployment forces." Bradley's knees literally buckled, just a fraction of an inch, but enough for everyone to see. I was now his direct commander. His career, his promotions, his entire future in the military were now held in the palm of my hand. "Colonel Knox," I continued, my voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel, "I have reviewed the readiness reports of your battalion. They are soft. You are soft. Starting Monday at 0500, your entire command will begin a combat readiness overhaul. I will personally be overseeing your field exercises. I suggest you trade that bourbon for water. You're going to need it." "Yes, ma'am," Bradley squeaked, completely emasculated in front of his peers, his fiancée, and his future father-in-law. I turned back to my father. He looked broken, diminished, suddenly appearing every bit his age. The power dynamic had shifted permanently. He had spent his whole life worshipping rank and power, and now I held more of both than he ever could have dreamed. "You banned me from your ceremony tonight, Owen," I said, adjusting the cuffs of my uniform. "Consider the ban permanent. I don't want your money, I don't want your legacy, and I no longer want a place at your table. My family wears combat boots, and they don't abandon their own." I didn't wait for a response. I executed a flawless about-face, saluted General Henderson one final time, and walked off the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one spoke a word. The only sound in the grand ballroom was the sharp, rhythmic click of my polished dress shoes echoing against the marble, walking away from the Carter family and walking back into the life I had earned. Thank you so much for watching the epic conclusion of Sophia's journey. If you loved seeing the ultimate karma delivered to her toxic family and watching Bradley get put in his place, please like this video, share it with someone who loves a great comeback story, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life dramas. Don't forget to drop a comment below letting us know your favorite part of the story. See you in the next video.